signed the Freedmen's Bank Act, authorizing the organization of national banks for racially emancipated Black Americans. This bank is just what the freedman needs, remarked President Abraham Lincoln on March 3rd, 1865. Hood Paralegals here. I'm Javon Curtis along with Corey Woodland. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you all. So a simple conversation about credit created this episode. Why do minorities not have bank accounts? Why do we feel that credit is not important? Why do we have distrust in financial institutions? That's the name of the episode. The Freedmen's Bank was Lincoln's last act of emancipation. Shortly after signing the Freedmen's Bank Act, Lincoln was killed. Despite his assassination, the bank continued to grow rapidly. By January 1874, a little under 10 years, deposits at its 34 branches across the United States totaled $3,299,201, which is about $65 million in today's money. Even though the expansion was successful, the Freedmen's Bank closed on June 28, 1874, under a shroud of suspicion and accusations. The rise and collapse of the Freedmen's Bank is an important story in Black and American history. The severe disparities in wealth and income between Black and white Americans is widely known. The origins of this is less appreciated. Before there was a Great Depression or a Great Recession, racially emancipated Black Americans had their first monies as free persons mishandled and never returned in full. The genesis. Several issues led to the creation of the Freedmen's Bank. The emancipation of slaves, increased pay of Black soldiers, and migrations of Black Americans throughout the North and South. Cases of Black soldiers being swindled, for instance, were quite common, highlighting that we need to establish a formal and central banking institution for newly freed Blacks. Following a meeting of key political and business leaders on January 27, 1865, plans proposing the Freedmen's Bank were sent to Congress, which swiftly approved the banking institutions. The subsequent outreach efforts were led by the bank's initial president and inspector and superintendent of schools for the Freedmen's Bureau. The organization authorized by the President Lincoln on March 3rd, 1865 to support and assist freedmen and freedwomen during the Reconstruction was a white Northerner named John W. Alvord. Alvord, a former minister and attached to General William Tecumseh Sherman during the Civil War, traveled throughout the South recruiting Blacks using endorsements from General Oliver O. Howard, the commissioner of the Freedmen's Bureau. As an order from Howard, Negro soldiers should deposit their bounty money with him. To assure possible depositors, Alvord also carried a handwritten letter from the General Howard, which read, "I consider the Freedmen's Bank to be greatly needed by the colored people and have welcomed it as an auxiliary to the Freedmen's Bureau." Success. Due to such recruiting efforts, the bank's list of Black depositors grew quickly, and soon 34 branches were established in locations across the country, including New York City, Atlanta, Memphis, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C., which also served as the headquarters. Go into the bank at any forenoon, and the office is found full of Negroes depositing little sums of money, drawing little sums of money, or remaining to a distant part of the country where they have relatives to support or debts to discharge, remarked a reporter in 1870 in Charleston, South Carolina, amazed by the bank's popularity. Problems. By 1871, Congress had authorized the bank to provide mortgages and business loans. Such mortgages and business loans, however, were usually given to whites, creating a financial paradox. Banks using the savings and income of Black depositors to advance the economic fortunes of whites who had at their disposal mainstream banks that excluded Blacks. Soon, reports and rumors of corruption within the bank's white management threatened the bank's existence. In response, the bank's management was replaced with a variety of Black elites, most notably Frederick Douglass, who was appointed the head of the bank in March of 1874. These changes did not prevent the bank's closing, with Douglass later describing the experience as being unwittingly, quote-unquote, married to a corpse. Despite their usual disagreements, both W.E. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington did agree that the bank's collapse was a major blow to the confidence and livelihood of scores of black depositors who trusted the bank with their savings. Du Bois will remark, then in one sad day came the crash. All the hard-earned dollars of the freedmen disappeared, but that was the least of the loss. All the faith and savings went too, and much of the faith in men, and that was a loss that a nation which today sneers at Negroes' shiftlessness to have never yet made good. Booker T. Washington noted, when they found out that
all
they had
calls
lost
other than properly placed attorney calls may be monitored and recorded.
They had lost faith in savings banks, and it was a long time after this before it was possible to mention a savings bank for Negroes without some reference being made to the disaster of the Freedmen's Bank. By 1900, only $1,638,259.49, which in today's money is roughly around $43 million, or 62% of the total amount of depositors prior to the bank's failure, had been paid. Deposits worth some $22 million in today's dollars were largely lost. In the end, most black depositors lost their savings, received little to no money back from the bank or the federal government. And it echoes today. As we mark the 153rd anniversary of the Civil War, the lesson of that era remains potent. For its part, the story of the Freedmen's Bank revealed the important foresight Lincoln had in seeing a connection between the political freedom of black Americans and their financial security. It also reminds us that to understand black banking and wealth today, we need to know some history. Black wealth issues are not new problems, rather they are historical, rooted in a persistent pattern of loss and mistreatment, beginning with the mishandling of freedmen's and free women's money during Reconstruction. This part of the promise of Black History Month, as it provides an opportunity to shine a light on not only the success of Black America, but also on the root of persistent patterns of unequal and unfair treatment. Indeed, as we continue to carve a path through the aftermath of the Great Recession, the mortgage crisis, and growing racial disparities in wealth, the history of the Freedmen's Bank can serve as an important reminder of the connection between financial and political freedom and mobility. The conversation damage was done to black wealth and confidence long before banks were, quote-unquote, too big to fail. With more information, here's Corey Woodland.
All right, thanks everyone for tuning in again. It's episode 12 of the Hood Paralegal Podcast. You know, it's a new year, and I wish everybody a happy New Year's, you know, and a blessed 2023. And, you know, as my partner elaborated on, you know, this episode we're going to be talking about distrust in the financial, while African Americans distrust financial institutions. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide some of the solutions that can help close the wealth gap for African Americans. We started off with many households lack access to mainstream banking institutions, which contribute to households being either unbanked or underbanked. This is especially acute for communities of color. Policymakers will need to make long-term structural changes to achieve more equitable outcomes for black households as the country considers the necessary next steps to rebuild its economy and society after the pandemic and the ensuing economic crisis. Postal banking should be a core part of the U.S. Postal Service mission to deliver services to almost every community in the country. The federal government could provide vital access to financial services by broadening the mandate of the Postal Service to offer postal banking, such as a stable bank account for those who are underbanked or unbanked, small loans and check cashing services, which could reduce the wealth stripping effect of the exclusionary and predatory financial institutions. Such a system could also serve as a public distribution method for federal and state benefits such as economic impact payments in the cases and the CARE Acts, or the quarterly or monthly distribution of earned income tax credit and the child tax credit. Postal banking will overcome a structural barrier for African Americans in the U.S. financial system and will reduce the damage done to many black households and communities that regularly face predatory lenders and lose large shares of their wealth. Now, the next step will be to create a blueprint to revamp the Minority Business Development Agency 13. The first step, and the statistic that really intrigued me, was African Americans own fewer than 2% of small businesses with any employees, but they make up 13% of the U.S. population. In comparison, white households own 82% of small employer firms, even though they account for only 60% of the U.S. population. Wide and persistent inequities in wealth and access to capital cause these disparities in small business ownership. The federal government can play an important role in creating more equitable business environment, even though in the past it has often perpetuated rather than mitigated these inequities. The Biden administration can help cut small business disparities if it decided to overhaul a long neglected agency that is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, the Minority Business Development Agency, known as the MBDA. A re-envisioned MBDA could then take the following steps. First, they can start an economic equity grant program. This program will support municipal projects that boost wealth creation, opportunity, and minority business development in African American communities. Then they can launch a business center initiative for minority serving institutions. These will be located at historically black colleges and universities known as HBCUs, tribal colleges, and universities and other MSIs. It will also give substantial grants to operate businesses, incubators, and accelerators at every MSI in the country. Current students and community members interested in starting or growing their own business could receive startup capital, technical and legal assistance, and other support from these business centers. Then they can create an office of research and evaluation. Now, this office will study the obstacles to wealth generation and hurdles to business development in Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color. It will also offer technical assistance to other MBDA offices and initiatives. And this office will conduct pilot and demonstration projects that will analyze novel ideas of capital finance anchored in new improving program concepts such as baby bonds or debt-free college and their effect on racial gaps in the business development and growth. The next step, provide low-cost government-backed capital to licensed minority business investment companies. This capital will be invested in Black and Latino businesses. And then the next step would be to establish an Office of Advocacy and Intergovernmental Affairs. Now, this office would evaluate the effects of proposed legislation, and regulations on barriers to minority-owned small business creation and success. Then we will advance the economic concerns of Blacks, Indigenous, and other communities of color in front of various government bodies, as well as coordinate interagency efforts to support minority-owned businesses, which will redesign federal funding of research and development. Now, Black researchers, inventors, and entrepreneurs face large hurdles in receiving federal research and development funds, known as R&D funds, in the current design and application of such funds. The Biden administration and Congress can lower the racial gaps in R&D funding and offer a pathway for R&D dollars that both dedicate funding to Black-led research and establish an innovation dividend. Then the next step, the proposal developed in the previous CAP report envisions additional financial support for R&D by Black inventors and entrepreneurs. Now, the proposal asks to, and this proposal would include providing more money for federal R&D funds that will go to HBCUs through dedicated stream of funding. The federal agencies will need to offer technical assistance and financial support to help these HBCUs build grant management capacity. They also will help foster mentoring relationships between researchers at HBCUs and African American researchers who have experience getting grant funding. Then provide federal R&D dollars for research conducted at HBCUs beyond medical researchers and medical professionals. Then they will have to create an oversight board that will ensure black scientists can fully participate in identifying new innovative solutions to many of society's problems. Then we will create more public and private research partnerships between HBCUs and the private sector. The next step will be to use federally owned real estate to establish and expand innovation incubators at or near HBCUs. Then we will offer researchers at HBCUs and those who collaborate with HBCUs low cost or free access to set up labs, manufacturing, and other research facilities. Now, this proposal further envisions the creation of an innovation dividend. The federal government will have $125 billion annually in new R&D, which is higher than the current low of about $100 billion per year. Underlying this calculation is an assumption that the federal government's annual R&D spending will grow with gross domestic product based on congressional budget offices, long-term economic projections. Each new and successful investment is assumed to last for 20 years. Now, this is equal to the usual patent protection limit. The calculation further assumes that all investments create an average inflation-adjusted rate of return of about 3%. Now, this is close to the long-term risk-free rate of return assumed by the CBO.
All calls other than properly placed attorney calls may be monitored and recorded.
Now, this is close to the long-term risk-free rate of return assumed by the CBO, but well below historical averages. And the federal government can receive the extra value of these investments. Private companies' profits then only come from private sector investments. The federal government can pay out those funds as innovation dividends, typically in the form of targeted cash payments to African Americans who have been left out of the innovation funding for decades. Now, this is only part one of this series that we're doing. And, the next episode, we're going to provide more information and more solutions that will help close the web gap between African Americans. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this episode, and we look forward to hearing from y'all next week, hearing y'all comments. Don't forget to comment, like, and share, to spread the word and get this dialogue spreading, And one thing Hood Paralegal is dedicated to this year is, man, we want to help you change and control your narrative, and protect the brand. And part of protecting the brand is controlling the narrative and putting yourself in position to allow you and give you the information to put yourself in position, because information truly is powerful. And thank you, everybody, for have a good day, everybody, and success to you all. Happy New Year's once again. I'm out.